Thank you for having us, and hi everybody. Really great to be here, and I'm going to start that presentation. I'm Sarah Saunders, Head of Learning and National Partnerships at the British Museum. So our department covers four key sort of areas in the museum. National programmes, so everything we do around the UK, that's projects, touring exhibitions. It could be things like our portable antiquities and treasure scheme. So that's quite an unusual thing that we're responsible for, and we're responsible for the treasure process in England, which is a really interesting area of the work we do. And we work with people around the country to record things they've found in the UK. I'm also responsible for interpretation, which is some of the work that we do for exhibitions. So that includes the development of the text with the curators, audios, videos, any interactives in our major exhibitions. And Sam, if you just go on to the next slide, there's just one example, I think, there of how we use digital technology in exhibitions. This was in our Ashurbanipal exhibition, just using projection mapping to pick out detail on sculptures, which can be quite hard to read, and so we've done that quite a bit. So that's an example of how we use digital in our exhibitions. If you go back, Sam, so we also look after, just go back to the previous one, volunteers. So volunteers work across all our programs, our temporary exhibitions, permanent galleries, and they deliver many different tours to the public and provide hands-on sessions, so handling object sessions, and eye-opener tours and things like that, and they're all free. And then our learning programs, which is what we're going to focus on today with our school part of that, our schools program. And if you go on to the next slide, next two slides, Sam, after that one, that's great. So our learning programs consist of predominantly these three teams: schools and young audiences, which Sam is part of, our adult programs team, which runs all our adult events, and our community programs, whereby we do outreach in the community. We work with diaspora communities, and we make sure we make our programs as inclusive as possible to many different communities and make sure we can get everybody involved. So we also have very specific programs around British Sign Language, described tours for visually impaired visitors, and we want to make everybody feel really welcome. So we try and make all our programs as accessible as possible. So our main audience for schools are 7 to 11-year-olds, and that reflects the curriculum and our strengths in the objects that we have at the British Museum and how they relate to the curriculum. Now in the UK, we have 4 different curricula, one for each of the nations of the United Kingdom. And so what we try to do is make sure that our offer is cross-curricular and that it can relate to the different curricula in the UK as well. And that we've found that very important for delivering a national programme. And we deliver a total of around 40 school sessions, different types of sessions. And Sam will talk about the ones that relate to the Samsung Digital Discovery Centre today, but our programme breaks down as follows. So for Key Stage 1, so for the very, very young children, we do 3 different sessions in the core programme and 2 Samsung sessions. For Key Stage 2, which is the 7 to 11-year-olds that I was talking about, we do around 17 sessions and we do around 14 Samsung sessions. And for Key Stage 3, which is the senior pupils, we do around 4 sessions and around 7 sessions, and one or two SDDC sessions. So all of them are really cross-curricular, and they cover science, technology, engineering, maths, numeracy, literacy, religious studies, art and design, geography, and of course history. And history for the British Museum is our real USP. And so we can do those programs really, really well, and you'll see that with what Sam shows you later. We also offer special educational needs options, and we're very flexible in really adapting our programs as we need to and listening to our audiences. So our programs focus on areas of the world like Africa, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, China, the Vikings, Anglo-Saxons, the Middle East, Islamic world. So, and we've got 4 sessions that are specifically cross-cultural, which is really important as well, to look at what civilizations were doing across time. And we really want to do more about that as well. So, if we go on to the next slide, Sam. Yeah, so these are really a breakdown of what we do with the schools program. So the schools program is an award-winning program. It's won numerous awards over the years. We have the Samsung Digital Discovery Center, which I'll talk a bit more about. We have these wide range of bookable, self-led and facilitated visits. We have lots of free teaching resources, and I think there's links going to be put into the chat around our website, so you can see those. And we do quite a lot on teacher professional development sessions, which is called CPD in the UK. Yeah, so if you go on to the next slide, Sam. So just a little bit about the pandemic as well. So we had to have a total rethink of our learning programs with the building closed in the pandemic. And luckily we had the Samsung Digital Discovery Center team who were already delivering virtual visits. Most other staff that we had in our teams, and I think this is the same for all of you, no doubt, hadn't really done any online delivery before. So we had to very quickly think about offering professional training in delivering online. And that was really important to us getting up and running and increasing our digital offer during the pandemic. And when the museum reopened, there were strict sort of one-way routes and things like that. So we'll have a look at that. And we really increased our virtual visits. So these are our stats here on screen from pre-pandemic. So we had pre-pandemic, we had over 320,000 children visited as part of the school trip, and 120,000 of those were UK schools and about 200,000 were international schools. We delivered about 55,000 facilitated visits out of those to the UK schools. And then this year, just to give you a snapshot of how the recovery is going this year at the British Museum, the total we're predicting for this year is around 140,000 school pupils, which is about 43% of pre-pandemic visitors. And the totals for the first 6 months of this year, from this financial year, from April to September, of 42,500 UK pupils have come already, and 27,900 approximately international pupils. So it's not back to pre-pandemic levels, but we are seeing a return of our schools, and we very much look forward in the future to having our Chinese visitors back, and Japanese visitors, for instance. We are international wise, we're getting a lot of European visitors and American visitors. So yeah, we're very much looking forward to the rest of the world coming back. So next slide, please, Sam. Yeah, and our digital learning aims, really, I just wanted to set these out because I think these are really important for everyone to think about. So it's not about replacing the objects. I think what we see digital is as a tool in order to enhance the visit and to enhance those objects, to bring the history to life using those digital technologies. And we want to put young people at the centre of their learning, and digital learning programs can really help do that. It's a different way of learning, so it's really important. And we can reach teachers and children right across the country, which is really exciting, and potentially across the world. At the moment, these programs are just in the UK, but it's really exciting about what we might do in the future. We can reach schools that have barriers to visiting due to their transport costs, remote locations and distance, and we can provide teachers with the skills and confidence to teach using objects, and also to create digital assets for them that they can then use in the classroom. And I think that's something we'll be doing much more of over time, creating more assets that can easily be used by teachers. Next slide, Sam. Here was our building when it was just before it reopened, and you can see there how we've started to use more QR codes to access free audio commentaries. And with the Samsung program, we also created a new family activity, for instance, called Museum Missions, which was delivered and still is being delivered through QR codes. So QR codes have kind of gone a bit out of fashion, but they became so important again in the pandemic. So I think that was a really good learning experience. So we've been funded for our digital programs by Samsung since 2004. So that's going to be 18 years this year. So very much the museum was early adopter of digital learning programs. And technology is always improving. So we aim to make the most of the current technology and design experiences with our audiences. So today we're talking about schools, but we can also create lots of digital programs for families, and are currently developing some new augmented reality tablet tours to replace an augmented reality mobile game, which we produced in 2014 called A Gift for Athena. And outside of Samsung work, we are also working on the development of a digital experience for schools, working with over 10 partners in the UK, which will launch later in 2023. So we can't really talk about that today, but that's something really exciting that's coming. There's lots going on. We're tremendously excited about this space and the possibilities and the future of digital learning. So now I'm going to hand over to Sam Adamson, who is our Samsung Education Manager. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and hello, everyone. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the things to consider in our digital learning program, things that we took a look at, and some kind of helpful tips to make a really successful program that incorporates lots of digital skills, but also with the history and the objects that we have here in the museum. But first, a little breakdown of the Samsung Digital Learning Program. So it's split into schools and families. We're just going to focus on the school side in this lecture today. And we have that into two categories currently. We have our virtual visits, which are a selection of online sessions that are delivered over Zoom into schools around the UK's classrooms. And we also have our on-site workshops too. These are held in the Samsung Digital Discovery Centre in the British Museum, and they incorporate lots of digital skills using tablets and phones provided to us by Samsung. So we've got a number of different sessions on a range of different subjects from history that all complement the British Museum's objects as well. And these have proved really popular. 98% of teachers would use an SDDC product again or come and join us for a session. We see lots of repeat visitors, which is really brilliant. And we see really great numbers with these, particularly with virtual visits that were expanded during the pandemic and have now become a mainstay of the program. So I'm going to talk a little bit about virtual visit sessions in particular, as it's such a really successful aspect of the Samsung program. So before the pandemic, we were running a maximum of 6 per week, but it was actually a lot less because schools had to just request these sessions. They had to phone up and ask for them rather than there be a dedicated online booking system for them. But during the pandemic, there was a lot of time to refocus. The museum was closed, so we really took a look at the program and decided what bits we could improve and also where we could deliver, because schools were open, but everything else was closed. So we could still run these virtual visits, and we decided to expand them. So we initially expanded to 15 per week in September 2020, and then increasing that to a very large 33 per week in November as well. So we increased this because we found the demand was still really high with schools being open. Teachers were still looking for those activities, things to do to vary it. And we also could focus all of our resources into this program because none of our other programs were running. So at its peak, it was 33. However, we have dropped down a little bit now with the return of on-site workshops and our family programs as well. So we like to keep a varied and diverse program and keep that balance. But I'm pleased to say that we are currently running 18 sessions a week. So the demand is still very high. It's one of those things that has stuck after the pandemic. We found that teachers really enjoy those too. And a bit later, I'm going to talk about some of the aspects of virtual visits and why it's such a successful digital program. It's important to consider when you are expanding a program, such as the number of sessions, you're expanding your resources in line with it too. So we knew that it was really popular. We knew that lots of teachers were eager to attend these sessions. So what was holding us back, what was limiting us, were the resource factors, things like number of facilitators to deliver them, the amount of rooms we needed to deliver these sessions in, and also the amount of time the admin team needed for booking as well. And as part of this, because they were so popular, because it's such an expanded section of programming, we introduced an online booking system dedicated for virtual visits that sped up the process as well. So it's a really key thing for when you are developing your digital programs and you want to expand, that you also consider and plan the expansion of the resources in line with that as well. So I'm going to touch on what I think are 4 really important points for building a digital learning program. These are things that we adopted during the Samsung program, and we still continue to do when developing new sessions and making alterations to our existing ones. So the first one is to plan for your audience. So you should be thinking about the audience you're going to be designing these sessions for, really have them at the center, because these are the people who are going to attend your session. So you want them to have the best experience possible and for that material to be relevant and exciting to them. The second is that the technology should complement the content. This is talking about having the objects and the history, the stories that are the most important thing about schools learning at the heart of these sessions. Technology is brilliant, but what you need is that technology to not be the focus and a distraction. It should be there to complement and enhance these objects. Next, it should be interactive and also engaging as well. It can be difficult if students are looking at a screen for a long period of time. So you've got to think of ways to engage them, enjoy them, give them those new and exciting experiences that they wouldn't have had perhaps just staring at a screen, or indeed at just an object in a glass case. And using technology, you can create lots of different ways of doing that. And finally, making it accessible and flexible. This is really important as well. So within your audience, there's going to be a variety of different factors, and it's important that you make these sessions accessible to all of your audience and also flexible as well, so you can adapt it in case something goes wrong or to those different access needs. So starting with the first one, to plan for your audience. So this is really important because it allows you to create content that's valuable and enjoyable to those it's aimed at. Audiences are varied and diverse. They'll interact differently. And it's a difficult thing to come to terms with, but unfortunately, you can't create a program that is going to be just as appealing to everyone. Audiences are so varied that something that broad won't be specific, and particular audiences won't get the value they want. So it's important to identify your audience, in this case schools, but even thinking about a variety of factors within schools, such as the age, things like their location, the setting where they're going to be. They're going to be on site, online, how much time they have, how much time do you have to deliver this session, what their knowledge and interests is, so making sure it's relevant to them for what they're studying, and also things like the class size, how that might impact it, and what their expectations are as well. What are they expecting to get out of this session? These things are all really important to consider in the planning stage of whether you're developing a whole new program or a specific activity as well, because considering these and then designing the content and the program around it is what's going to make that successful. So Sarah mentioned a few of these things earlier, but I'm just going to kind of touch on them as well, some of our considerations. So our biggest audience is Key Stage 2, which is ages 7 to 11. That's our largest schools audience. So we want to create a number of different activities and workshops and sessions that cater to them. So working out what's the appropriate age range in terms of content and knowledge, but also skills as well, particularly when you're working with digital technology. So how easy will it be for them to navigate things like the tablets and the phones? Luckily, we live in an age where students start very young with this technology, and we're seeing sort of increasingly sophisticated levels of interaction with that technology, but it's still really important to pitch it at the right aim for the ages you're delivering to. Next, on to kind of things like interest and knowledge, what themes and subjects. So Sarah also mentioned this, we have a national learning curriculum here in the UK, and we have lots of different objectives that teachers need to meet, and things like what they want to study, what skills their students need to learn, what they need, knowledge they need to acquire. So whenever we're designing a new session or workshop, we always take a look at the curriculum objectives for things like history, because it's really important that the teachers can see that we're meeting those needs, and it means that they're likely to then book onto the session, but also that the students are getting that value as well. And they're also linking with the things they're studying at school. It's always really nice when a class come in and tell you that they've been learning so much about ancient Egypt and Egyptian tombs, and then your session matches that straight away. And it's also really nice too when they come in and they don't know anything, and you're that introduction for their topic that's going to set them off for the year and really inspire that learning. Another factor is location. So thinking about where your main audience is. So for us, it's schools around the UK, but because the British Museum is based in London, it's much more accessible to those schools. So schools from around London and the surrounding areas are the ones most likely to come and visit the museum. So it's important to identify that and keep that strong relationship, but also understand that there are schools around the UK who want to engage with the British Museum and the objects. And it's how do we get those schools to engage? How can we facilitate that and remove some obstacles to participation? That's where the beauty of our virtual visit sessions come in, being online and able to be delivered into classrooms. It means that schools all around the UK can access those things. And then finally, why are they here? That's to learn knowledge and new skills as well. And this applies really nicely with digital programs, because not only are they learning about the objects and the history, they can also be acquiring new skills as well. For example, in one of our on-site workshops, we use some Photoshop skills and a green screen to show them how to cut out and edit photos. And we teach them these digital skills that they can hopefully then use at home and at school as well. And mostly also to have fun too. It's really important to have this in mind when you're planning for your audience, particularly when you're looking at schools and museum trips. Schools and museums are a really nice combination, but I think it's important to differentiate between the two. You want these school groups to come in and think that they are doing a completely different experience to what they are doing in school. You don't want it to seem like it's perhaps a lesson in a classroom. It needs to be exciting and enjoyable. And that's the kind of thing that is going to stimulate that further inquiry and that interest in these subjects. If you come to a museum and you go away feeling not only like you've learned something, but that you've done it in a really unique and enjoyable way. So an example of looking at location and our audience is in our workshops and virtual visits. So here you can see on the left, we've got a graph with some data plotted in our schools workshops in 2021. So you can see that they're all focused around a very sort of central area in London. There's a couple of them around, but they're mostly based in that London region. And that's because schools from further away find it much more difficult to travel. It's going to cost more. It's going to take more time to get there, especially if they need to get back in one day. So we recognize that, we plan for those audiences and those schools to come on site. But where virtual visits come in, you can see that we have schools all around the country. So when we were looking at expanding our virtual visits, the reason we chose to expand them is because it meant that we can open up and make our program more accessible to a much greater number of schools through increasing the number of online sessions and making these a real mainstay of the program, and also bringing up their quality too, so they can fit in line with the on-site workshop, and they can become just as much as a popular program as well. So when you're planning for your audience, whilst thinking of who your sort of main audience is, it's also good to think about those audiences that perhaps traditionally don't reach your museum, and how you can remove those obstacles, how you can remove those barriers to participation. Things like cost, time, and distance as well are all really important to consider. My second point is that you should complement the content with technology. So this is talking about how objects should be the center of these sessions and your program, because these are the things that are so important to our museums. They tell us about the people who lived in the past. They give us clues about what they achieved, believed in, and did throughout history. It's not the technology that is unique, it's these objects, as they show the stories of the people who made them. They tell us about the past. So these are the things that connect us with the past and its people, by looking at objects from the past, learning about them, the people who use them. So the technology, as wonderful it is not unique. There's technology in all of our lives, and you'll find in museums using all the same technology, but however, in each museum is a completely different collection of objects. So each of these museums have their own stories, their own knowledge to tell, and they can use that technology to facilitate it, to create new ways of engaging with the objects and the history that perhaps we previously wouldn't have been able to do. And then finally, one second. My slides have just moved on. There we go. It should make learning more accessible, and we can use technology to allow different ways of learning. Perhaps students learn in different ways. They might find technology more reassuring because it's more familiar to them. They might be able to, if they are visually impaired, zoom into certain aspects of the objects. You can use closed captions as well, that I know we're using in this lecture series too. So these are all really great ways of making this knowledge and making these objects more accessible to a greater number of people. So a little bit of an example of how we've done this in our virtual visit sessions are in how we look at the galleries of the British Museum. So of course, the students from the class aren't able to come and visit. Perhaps they're in a different location, far away. But when we're presenting to them, delivering these sessions into their classroom, we still want them to get them a bit of a sense of how the British Museum looks, as if they might be in the galleries. And it could be something quite simple. There's options, perhaps you could do a video tour of the galleries as well. We've just chosen to focus on a section of the galleries for this one. This is from our Peek into Prehistory presentation. And here we can see we've got part of the prehistory galleries at the British Museum. So students, if they've never been before, can get a sense of what it looks like in the museum. And what we've got here are a number of objects you can see, but as you can tell, they're very far away. It's difficult to make out what a few of those things are. So by using the technology, we can actually complement these objects. We can enhance them. So you're using technology to perhaps draw out a select number of objects that are all around a theme. So in this part, we're teaching students that a lot of the objects that we have from the distant past are only made from hard materials like stone, ceramic, and metals such as gold. And we're showing them here that we've got a range of different objects all made from these hard materials. They can see them up close, they can see how varied they are as well. And you can use this technology to go in further, things that you wouldn't be able to do necessarily if you were up close or if it was just staring at a picture. So we could, for example, tap on an object, you can read about what it is, some more detail and things like that. So it's using the technology to create these new and different learning experiences that perhaps you wouldn't have in a traditional manner, or also wouldn't be possible due to the location or environment that the class is in. Another example is this one here. This is what we use in our on-site workshop. So you can see again, relatively simple, but hopefully nice and effective. So we've got a video of Google Maps. We've zoomed in to London, to a particular building, and we reveal to the class that perhaps they recognize the building now. This is the British Museum. They might have come this way on their way in to the morning before the session. But then we can zoom straight out of the UK, out of London, and over to a different part of the world, to the part that we're going to focus on. So this video goes on in the actual session to zoom in to Egypt along the River Nile to the city of Thebes. And what this does is giving the students a real sense of where these objects have come from and how they've traveled to. We can show them just the lengths that these objects have traveled, and we can show them specific parts that we need to help them contextualize these objects. Often in a museum, it can be quite difficult because they're all in one place. They're all perhaps behind glass cabinets and things like that. Whereas here we can really bring them that background and that knowledge to hopefully deepen their understanding of these objects. My next point is that when you're designing your digital programs, you should always make sure to create interaction and engagement. Students should be able to engage with these objects in different ways. It should be entertaining and exciting and create those unique experiences. And studies have shown when learners interact with objects and also with each other, discussing them as well, they can construct greater meaning for themselves, and that results in more engaging and memorable experiences. They feel like they have shared something of themselves with these objects. They've developed that connection. They can also explore different ideas and opinions with each other too. And here at the British Museum, in our SDDC program, we've really made lots of attempts to try and drive that engagement and interaction. We do this with a number of ways. For example, with questions. It's really important, particularly in virtual visit sessions, to be asking the students questions throughout. This tests their knowledge, it keeps them engaged. Hopefully they have been listening, but also it's breaking up the time spent from myself talking to them answering as well. And all of these things are used throughout our virtual visits and also in our online sessions as well to keep students engaged. So what we do in our virtual visits, we ask the teachers to select students with their hands up to answer the questions for us. And that way the teacher is in control. It's much easier for them because they're in the room, the classroom, but we can still hear those answers and we can get the great input from the students. We can also adapt our questions as well, depending on sort of the ability and how familiar they are with a subject, which is really nice too. It's great when questions are used as a reminder to test their knowledge, but also it's okay if they don't know the right answer. And we always make sure that's really important to stress to students that it's okay if you're not sure, have a guess, explore and experiment. And a lot of the time, they're actually a lot closer than they think they would have been. We use gestures as well. When you're sat down for quite a long time, our virtual visit sessions are an hour, and our online sessions are an on-site session, are on about an hour and a half. It's important to use gestures too. We use this to get students to move about, keep them entertained, so they're not in one place as well. An example being in our prehistory session for our virtual visit, we get them to touch their clothes and touch their chairs as well. And that's in combination with the earlier slides I showed you of the prehistory gallery, getting them to think about soft and hard materials. So what do their clothes feel like? What do their chairs feel like? And then asking them which they think would last longer if they were buried underground for 1,000 years. So it's combining that physical sense of touch with those inquiry questions as well. We also have voting as well, and we try and do this as a class. It can be as simple as thumbs up if you think yes, thumbs down if you think no, and thumbs sideways if you're not too sure as well. And this is really nice as well. We give students a chance to discuss before they vote. They can discuss their ideas and they can participate as a class as well. These tend to be used at kind of our high points, our focal points of the session. So in our virtual visit session on the Roman Britain Treasure Challenge, All session, we've been learning about what treasure is, and we've been looking at some specific objects that were found by archaeologists. And at the height of the session, we get them to vote on which objects they think are treasure or not, using the knowledge that they've just learned about the Treasure Act and what makes treasure. We also make sure to include worksheets as well, particularly in our virtual visits. These are really important because this is some time when the children and the students are just working on something themselves without the facilitator engaging with and discussing them. So we give them worksheets that can be used for specific activities or throughout the session as a whole. For example, this one on the screen is from our Greek temples virtual visit, where the aim is that students are designing their very own Greek temple. So throughout the session, we talk them through different aspects, such as the pediment, what type of columns, what style of columns would they use, what god would they like to dedicate their temple to, and where would they like to build their temple. So what we're doing is we're teaching them this knowledge, but we're also providing that personalization as well. It's really nice to offer students choice in what they're doing and create some agency in what they choose to remember, and their preferences as well is really important. And again, that connects us with people from the past as well, because obviously they've made certain choices in the design of their objects or what these objects have been used for. And then finally, we also use quizzes as well. These are some of our most popular aspects of virtual visits and also the on-site programs too. So for virtual visits, we use a quiz site called Kahoot, where you can create custom quizzes using objects from the British Museum and answering questions about them that all tie in with the topic. So these are used either towards the start of a session to gauge engagement and how much knowledge students have on the subject, or also at the end as a bit of a test, a reminder as well. So the great thing about these is that we can select which objects that we use, we can discuss them in between each question, and we can also choose more than one as well. So it's really inspiring students to look closely at images of objects, look for details as well, and have that really questioning and examining mindset. So things you might do when looking at an object up close and physically, but of course, online, we can't replicate that in the same way. So we do it as best as possible through these different quizzes. And that's the same for our on-site sections as well. Another example of interactivity is this one here. This is from our Decoding Ancient Egyptian Tomb Paintings workshop in the SDDC. Students here learn about the tomb paintings of the Egyptian scribe Nebumun. And in this one, we can see a number of different foods on a green offering mat. So it's great for students to be able to look at this painting, but what we want to do is to get them to look at particular aspects, to perhaps categorize different objects as well, and to kind of pick apart this painting. And this is where the technology can really complement the content, again, to provide that interaction. For example, we asked them to come up and select a particular food or object and get them to guess what category it will go in, perhaps what that is. For example, here you can see a goose. We also have some objects that look a little bit more difficult. We've got some loaves of bread that we can see come in different shapes. So here we can teach them that not all of the objects are represented in the same way. We've got some things that are perhaps quite unusual to them, such as this one, which is an ox's heart. And again, we've got that different form of object as well. For example, both of these in the fruits and vegetable categories are grapes. The larger one, however, is a basket of grapes too. So here we can see that we're getting students to kind of inquire, test out, and they're kind of thinking about what these objects are, looking for those differences, looking for those kind of connecting factors as well. What do these things have in common? This is a little bit of an explanation about the Decoding Ancient Egyptian Tomb Painting session as a whole, and ties in nicely with what I've just mentioned about interactivity. So they start by looking and learning about these paintings, looking at why perhaps some paintings are drawn in a certain way, what decisions have been made to depict certain things. In that case, we've seen lots of different foods. The other paintings that we look at include Nebamun hunting in the marshes, one of perhaps his favorite hobbies, and also we have a garden as well, which is thought to be one of Nebamun's favorite places. So we're getting students to learn about the ancient Egyptians and their depictions of things in the afterlife, getting them to understand that the afterlife will be filled of all of their favorite things, and then getting those students to think about what their favorite things are. What are their favorite foods, hobbies, and places? And then we use the digital aspects. We use the green screen to recreate some of those things. So here you can see a green screen with some students posing. They're perhaps acting out a scene. Others decide to do a freeze frame of their favorite hobby as well. It's their favorite activity, and then they can create their very own modern wall painting in the far right image as well. So they can include their favorite animals, pets and things, food as well. So it's creating those connections, understanding what the people of the past did, why they chose to select certain things, to show things, and then recreating that as well. And again, the digital aspect is really complementing that as well. We're creating that engagement. We're getting students to move around, experiment with different ideas, and also to work together as well. And by engaging with these objects in this kind of multifaceted, so different ways, it's creating those connections. They've created their own wall painting. They might feel more of a personal connection to the paintings of Nebamun and understand perhaps why his paintings were like that in the past. The final thing I'm going to talk about in depth is being accessible and flexible. This is really important when designing your digital program. And this is because there are a number of different questions around something being accessible and flexible. And this really depends on the success of your program. So making it accessible to all of those different students in your audience, and also to some different environmental factors as well. Making it accessible means, do you have provisions for those who perhaps have a disability? Are the images large? Is the text large as well? Is there the right contrast to, for example, white on black, like I've done here? Can it also adapt to different abilities? Is there enough flexibility in how you can deliver that session? For example, I said that our audience is Key Stage 2, 7 to 11. This can actually be quite different if you have a class of 7-year-olds versus a class of 11-year-olds. Equally, if they're studying a topic at the beginning of a session, a year, or at the end of a year. So you need to make sure that you have points in your activities and session that you can create this flexibility. Perhaps you can ask some more detailed, in-depth questions. Perhaps you can make some things more simpler. Perhaps you can give some clues to people as well to help them with their knowledge, particularly if they're not too sure on specific words. How easy is it to use is really important as well. We've deliberately kept lots of our virtual visits and some of the digital technology in our on-site sessions very simple to use as well. The technology shouldn't be a barrier, and this kind of links back to my idea of technology complementing the content. Students shouldn't be focused on, how do I do this? This is difficult to work. How do I operate this tablet or this phone? They should have their focus on the knowledge, the objects they're learning about. They should be asking, what is this object? What can I see? What can I learn about this, rather than struggling with the technology? So we make it very simple to use. Our virtual visits are all delivered over Zoom using PowerPoint presentations and a worksheet that we hand out to schools beforehand. It means that it's really simple, there's no complicated aspects, and it also means that if something goes wrong, it's quite easy to create a change, or you can move on from that very quickly. If something that is integral to the session breaks, then that is going to nullify the whole thing. Where in ours, if something, for example, in our virtual visit, like the camera doesn't work, or you can't hear the school if their microphone doesn't work, we can still ask these questions during the Zoom chat. They still have the workshop, the worksheet activity as well. So these are all really important things that you need to consider when building your digital program, so you know that it's easy for lots of different people to be able to use, and also it's flexible because there are a number of different situations that you might be delivering this session in. So an example of this is from here from our Roman Britain session, where we are looking at a sheet with an activity. This is for students to decode a Roman coin. So what we do is we email these sheets to teachers beforehand, but we can also put this up on the screen as well in case they aren't able to print it off. It means that if they haven't printed the sheet, they can still do the activity. We can also make it accessible as well. We can make the coin large. We can tell them where to start from as well, because this can be quite a tricky challenge. So what they're trying to do is to work out the letters inscribed around the edge of this Roman coin. We tell them where to start. We can highlight certain aspects of the sheet, understanding that where the first letter is, and if you think you've worked that out, you can write it in the space with the 1 underneath. You can also see that we've provided them with a key as well. So once they've perhaps written down some of these letters, they can see what those letters stand for in terms of Latin words and what they're translated to. So you're providing help to something that originally is quite inaccessible. We can even give them hints as well. For example, that letter there looks a little bit like an H, and these might be interpreted by students as 2 eyes, perhaps just sloping downwards to a little towards the bottom. But we know that this letter is actually an A, and the one next to it is a V as well. And we can tell students this, give them that information that might be making this activity particularly difficult. And you can even add them in to start them off and give them a base point. This means that students aren't perhaps intimidated by what can be a difficult challenge. You can provide those areas of help if they need to, make it accessible for everyone, ensure they get the maximum learning out of it. We also provide them with a timer as well. We make sure we give them a good chunk of time to work on this. This is time where they could discuss with the person next to them, again, encouraging that collaboration as well. And it means that they can really work and focus on the objects. So moving on to some of the equipment that we use for our virtual visits to make it accessible and also flexible. This is really important too. Virtual visits began with very few amounts of equipment, just a laptop and some headphones. We have expanded in order to increase kind of the quality and the reliability of some of our sessions, but we can be very flexible, and this is something to consider when building your digital learning programs as well. Sort of what equipment do you need? What equipment is going to allow that accessibility and flexibility? For example, we introduced a ring light, for example, when we're in a room that we're delivering in a room when it can be quite dark. So keeping ourselves illuminated is really important so the students can see us more clearly. We have a backup laptop as well, which is perhaps one of our most important pieces of kit now. This is in case the laptop we're delivering from happens to freeze, lose connection or break. We've got that backup laptop that we can also deliver from as well. We have this logged into the Zoom too, and it's a really nice way of also viewing how the school see you as a facilitator. So you can have a quick glance to the side to see that everything is working nicely. The school can see your presentation, you're on the right slide, everything's working correctly. So again, it's making sure that everything is accessible and flexible in the case that something does go wrong. We've also got the fact that everything can fit into a bag as well. This is something that's really important for when we're delivering. So it means that we can deliver these sessions in any room in the museum as long as there's a good Wi-Fi connection. This means that if we ever need to move out of one of our dedicated facilitation rooms, we can do. It means if we need to put on an extra session, perhaps through no fault of their own, the school missed a session, or we need to put another one in a day. And if we have the capacity, if we have the staff, we can do that. And it means that it's a really flexible and accessible session, and it's really increased the number of sessions we've been able to deliver and the success of them. So here you can see the setup that we have. Like I said, this is now quite a complicated setup, but originally it was just one laptop. So you've got your delivery laptop in the center with the ring light on it. You can see to the right, you've got your backup one with the same screen, so you know that everything's working correctly, you're on the right slide. And we also have our work one to the left as well. Here we can have notes, we can write down the number of schools, any questions students have as well to answer them. So it means that we've got all of that information covered. When we're delivering our sessions, our facilitators know these sessions off by heart. They've done them loads of times, but we also have those notes just on the left, just in case if there's anything they need to refer to. It's also really integral if perhaps you need to edit the session for some reason. Perhaps the school have asked to leave early, or perhaps they've arrived late. It means that you can kind of look down, see what is coming next in the session. You can perhaps skip out a certain section as well in the slide. It means that you're really flexible, still keeping to time in that session. The school is still getting the best possible learning experience out of it. And then the final thing I'm going to touch on is training to deliver. So how do we train facilitators to deliver these sessions, particularly virtual visits, but a lot of these things also apply to our online sessions too. Firstly, it's really important when designing your digital programs to develop lots of training materials as well. These are going to be really helpful. So we develop session outlines for each session, which is kind of like a script of what facilitators can say. It shows the slide next to it as well, so they know where they should be on, where to click to next. They have those facts, those questions in there as well. And this is a really great benchmark to delivering a session. And the way we've designed these session outlines is that if you've never delivered a session before and you have the session outline, you could read that session outline and you could deliver that session. It might not be the most optimum way of delivering the session through practice and things like that. That will always be better. However, session outlines are a really good benchmark to have. We also use training videos too. We have training videos for all of our sessions that have been created by our facilitators. This is great for new facilitators delivering these sessions. They can see how it's performed. Whereas if they just had the slides and the session outline, that's great. But getting to see how a facilitator looks on camera, perhaps they are doing certain things, when to use those gestures that I talked about, the voting for the thumbs up, asking questions, things like that. That's really important, and you can really see the flow of a session through training videos. And finally, research as well. It's really important to give time for facilitators to research these sessions, to get the knowledge, to give them specific facts that they can then use in them. Policies and procedures are really important too. We have a safeguarding children policy, so making sure that the students are safe in the class, on site, but also online as well, meaning that in a virtual visit, we need to make sure that the teacher is in the classroom at the same time and always in the class for those children, for their safety, and we make that really apparent and say we'll end the session if the teacher were to leave the room. We've got also policies on what to happen if there's a cancellation or a school doesn't turn up. How do we contact that school? Can we phone them in time in case they've forgotten or are having technical difficulties? Evaluation is really important too. We use surveys, observations, and personal reflection to really improve the sessions that our facilitators deliver. So we're always getting that feedback. When you're building your digital program, particularly at the beginning, you want as much feedback as possible, both from those delivering, but also those delivering too. It will allow you to make those changes and to make something really effective. And then finally, we make sure facilitators are adaptable. We make sure that they can adapt their delivery style to those different accessible audiences and different circumstances as well. And also their judgment too, if perhaps they think, which part should I decide to include, which part should I leave out in this session because we're running late? We teach them to be adaptable in that judgment. So just to summarize, these are the things that I think are really important in designing your digital program. You need to plan for your audience. The technology should be there to complement the content. The objects and stories should be at the heart. It should be interactive and engaging in lots of those different ways, both physically and digitally. And then finally, it should be accessible and flexible as well to all of those different audiences. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the talk. I've also included some links at the bottom as well, where you can learn about our learning program in the British Museum and the Samsung Digital Discovery Centre too.